A single apple can spark a thought. I'm Edwin.
Kevin Warsh has now taken over as the new chair of the Federal Reserve, and markets are already debating what his policy agenda really means. Two ideas stand out. First, he talks about rate cuts and balance sheet reduction. Second, he argues that the AI revolution will create a disinflationary force, giving the Fed more room to cut rates. On the surface, this sounds exactly like what Donald Trump would want to hear: lower interest rates, a confident Fed, and a story that technology will magically take care of inflation. But the real question is not whether Warsh sounds loyal to Trump. The real question is this: can the United States really cut rates, shrink the Fed's balance sheet, and rely on AI to suppress inflation, all at the same time? My answer is probably not. And if that answer is right, then the market may be misreading the next decade. Because the real investment question is not just, will the Fed cut? The real question is, are we entering a new disinflationary cycle, a new inflationary cycle, or something much worse: stagflation? That answer will decide the long-term direction of gold, silver, oil, copper, technology stocks, consumer stocks, and the broader commodity market. Let's start with Warsh's first major policy idea: cutting rates while continuing quantitative tightening. At first, this sounds disciplined. It sounds like the Fed is trying to support the economy while still normalizing its balance sheet. But this is not a new idea. The Fed began shrinking its balance sheet under Jerome Powell back in 2022. At that time, the policy mix was simple: rate hikes plus QT. Then, starting in 2024, the Fed moved toward a rate-cutting cycle. In theory, that became rate cuts plus QT. So Warsh is not introducing a revolutionary new framework. He is mostly putting new packaging on an old policy path. The problem is that this combination becomes unstable when market interest rates start rising again. Why? Because QT removes liquidity from the financial system. Less liquidity tends to put upward pressure on yields. Rate cuts, on the other hand, are supposed to lower financing costs and ease financial conditions. So the Fed is trying to push in two directions at once. It wants lower rates, but it also wants a smaller balance sheet. That can work for a while, but it cannot work forever if Treasury yields start rising because of deeper structural forces. At that point, the Fed faces a choice: either keep shrinking the balance sheet and risk higher yields, or expand the balance sheet again to suppress rates. That is why the idea of cut rates and shrink the balance sheet sounds cleaner in a speech than it does in the real bond market. So the next question is, why would U.S. rates rise in the first place? There are two major forces. The first is domestic, America's debt problem. The U.S. government is carrying a massive debt burden. The total amount of federal debt has continued to rise, and the trend became especially aggressive after 2020. This is not just a Biden problem. It is not just a Trump problem. It is a structural problem. Both parties want spending. Both parties want growth. Both parties want voters to feel protected from pain, but nobody wants to pay the full cost. So the Treasury issues more debt, and the bond market has to absorb it. To put that into perspective, the U.S. national debt isn't just growing. Washington is now adding roughly $1 trillion of new debt every 100 days. Think about that. That is an exponential curve that no technology can easily outrun. At some point, investors ask a very simple question: if the U.S. government keeps borrowing more, why should I accept a lower yield? That question alone puts upward pressure on long-term interest rates. The second force is international. For decades, the U.S. benefited from the dollar's central role in global trade, especially in energy markets. Many countries needed dollars, held dollars, and bought U.S. treasuries as reserves. But that system is no longer as unquestioned as it once was. Geopolitical conflict, sanctions, energy realignment, and the rise of alternative settlement systems have all encouraged some countries to reduce their dependence on the dollar and U.S. treasuries. If foreign buyers become less willing to hold treasuries, the U.S. has to offer higher yields to attract capital. So when people talk about rising U.S. rates, they should not only look at Fed policy. They should look at the debt load. They should look at fiscal deficits. They should look at the global demand for treasuries. And they should look at whether the dollar system itself is becoming less automatic. That is the background Warsh is walking into. This is where the political theater becomes misleading. People talk as if the Fed chair can simply decide to shrink the balance sheet. But the Fed chair does not control the entire system. The ability to shrink the balance sheet depends on two things that are largely outside the Fed's hands. First, fiscal discipline. If the U.S. government continues running large deficits, the Treasury must issue more debt. That means the market needs to absorb more supply. Second, economic efficiency. If the economy becomes more productive, it can support higher debt more easily. Growth makes the debt burden more manageable. But if productivity does not improve enough and deficits remain high, then the bond market will demand compensation. That compensation comes in the form of higher yields. So the valve of quantitative tightening is not fully in Warsh's hands. Part of it is in the hands of the White House and Congress. Part of it is in the hands of the real economy. Part of it is in the hands of foreign creditors. And that is the key point. Warsh can talk about QT, but if bond yields rise too much, the political system will not tolerate it. If mortgage rates rise, Trump will complain. If the stock market falls, Trump will complain. If Treasury financing costs rise, Washington will complain. So, if Warsh aggressively shrinks the balance sheet, while the rest of the world is already less eager to buy U.S. debt, he may not hear applause. He may hear political screaming. That is why the idea of Warsh as an independent inflation fighter is questionable. He may talk like a central banker, but he is operating inside a political machine that wants cheap money. Now let's move to Warsh's second argument. AI will create disinflation. This is the part markets love. The logic sounds simple. AI improves productivity. AI replaces labor. AI reduces costs. Lower costs lead to lower inflation. That story is elegant. It is also politically useful. If AI naturally brings down inflation, then the Fed can cut rates without appearing reckless. Trump gets lower rates. Wall Street gets liquidity. Technology stocks get another narrative. Everybody wins. Except the story is incomplete. AI may reduce some costs, but AI is not weightless. It does not run on imagination. AI runs on data centers. Data centers run on electricity. Electricity? It demands grids, power plants, transformers, copper, aluminum, natural gas, uranium, and enormous capital investment. This is the part the AI disinflation crowd often ignores. AI does not live in the cloud. It lives on the grid. And the grid is physical. To understand AI, we need to remember something basic. Every major industrial revolution has also been an energy revolution. The first industrial revolution was not just about machines. It was about coal. The second industrial revolution was not just about factories, cars, and mass production. It was about oil, electricity, and large-scale energy systems. AI is no different. AI is a new stage of machine replacing human labor. But machines require energy. The more powerful the machine, the more energy it needs. So if AI becomes truly widespread, energy demand will not fall. It will rise. And it may rise dramatically. Even if we ignore extreme forecasts and assume energy demand only doubles in certain AI-related sectors, the question remains, can today's energy system support that? Can today's grid handle it? Can today's copper supply handle it? Can today's silver supply handle it? Can today's nuclear and natural gas capacity handle it? The answer is not obvious. In fact, the more realistic answer is that the current system is not ready. That means AI could create a strange macroeconomic outcome. It may reduce labor costs in some sectors, but increase energy and infrastructure costs across the entire economy. That is not simple disinflation. That is a recipe for structural inflation. The modern economy is built on energy. Manufacturing is energy use. Transportation is energy use. Data processing is energy use. Food production is energy use. Mining is energy use. Energy is not just one input among many. It is the base layer of the entire production system. So even if AI improves efficiency, that does not automatically mean prices fall. If electricity prices rise, if copper prices rise, if silver prices rise, if grid expansion costs rise, then AI-driven productivity gains may be offset by higher physical input costs. This is especially important for commodities like gold, silver, copper, uranium, oil, natural gas, and possibly aluminum and tin. AI may be digital at the user interface, but underneath, it is deeply material. It needs metals. It needs power. It needs cooling. It needs land. It needs infrastructure. So when Warsh says AI will bring disinflation, the correct response is, maybe one day, but not before the energy and material system is rebuilt. And rebuilding that system requires higher prices, more investment, and a long period of capital reallocation. That process is inflationary before it becomes disinflationary. If humanity wants an AI economy, it needs a new energy economy. That does not happen for free. To build more power generation, more nuclear capacity, more transmission lines, more mines, more refining capacity, and more grid infrastructure, capital must flow into the energy and resource sectors. But capital does not flood into those sectors because politicians give speeches. Capital flows when prices rise enough to create strong returns. That means energy prices and key material prices may need to rise significantly before supply expands enough to meet AI-era demand. This is not a one-year adjustment. This is a decade-long process. History gives us a useful lesson. The new economy of the late 20th century, information technology, automation, aerospace, and globalization, did not emerge from nowhere. It was supported by an earlier expansion in global energy supply. The energy price shocks of the 1970s were painful, but they also triggered massive investment in energy production. That helped create the supply foundation for later economic expansion. In other words, new technology needs old-fashioned physical support. The internet needed electricity. Globalization needed oil. AI needs power and metals. Without them, the revolution cannot scale. There is also another problem with the AI disinflation story. Inflation is not only about technology. Inflation is also about money, credit, fiscal deficits, and government behavior. If a country keeps issuing debt, running large deficits, and pressuring its central bank to keep rates low, then technology alone cannot guarantee stable inflation. Look at countries with chronic inflation problems. Technology may exist there too. AI may be developing there too. But if the monetary and fiscal system is unstable, inflation expectations do not magically become stable. So the claim that AI can solve inflation is too simplistic. AI can improve productivity. AI can reduce some costs. AI can reshape labor markets. But AI cannot repeal fiscal reality. AI cannot erase debt. AI cannot create copper out of thin air. AI cannot build a new electric grid overnight. That is why the AI disinflation narrative is dangerous. It gives markets a comforting story while ignoring the physical and fiscal constraints underneath. Now let's talk about labor. In the long run, technological revolutions usually create new jobs. That is why I am not permanently pessimistic about AI. The internet destroyed some jobs, but it also created many new industries. Automation eliminated some roles, but it also created new categories of work. AI will probably do the same over a long enough timeline. But in the early stage, technological revolutions usually destroy jobs before they create enough new ones. That is the painful transition. AI will replace many routine tasks, especially in white-collar work: writing, analysis, customer service, coding support, administration, translation, legal research, financial modeling, and more. New jobs will appear, but not immediately. And not everyone displaced by AI will be able to move into those new jobs. An administrative worker laid off by AI at age 55? They aren't going to spend 2 years learning Python. They just become unemployed. The transition gap is real, and it is brutal. A junior analyst replaced by AI tools cannot automatically become an AI infrastructure specialist. Skills take time to change. Education takes time. Institutions take time. Society takes time. So before AI creates a new labor equilibrium, it may first create unemployment, wage pressure, and social tension. There is another issue: distribution. AI may increase productivity, but who captures the gains? Workers? Consumers? Small businesses? Or the owners of capital, data, chips, cloud infrastructure, and platforms? Most likely, the early gains will concentrate among a small group of companies and investors. That means AI could widen inequality before it improves broad prosperity. If income becomes more concentrated, consumer demand may weaken. This creates a contradiction. AI investment may boost GDP, but AI-driven job losses and inequality may weaken household demand. So the economy could receive a supply-side investment boom while the demand side becomes fragile. That combination is not necessarily a clean productivity miracle. It could become unstable. And in the worst case, it could contribute to stagflation: weak demand, weak employment, but persistent cost pressure from energy, metals, and infrastructure. Now we return to the original question. Is Kevin Warsh Trump's puppet? Honestly, that is not the most important question. The more important point is that Warsh's message fits Trump's political needs very well. Trump wants lower rates. Wall Street wants easier financial conditions. Tech investors want the AI boom to continue. The government wants manageable debt service costs. So the narrative is convenient. AI will reduce inflation, therefore the Fed can cut rates. QT can continue. Markets can stay calm. Growth can continue. But convenient narratives are not always true. The deeper reality may be very different. The U.S. fiscal system is under pressure. The Treasury market is under pressure. The global dollar system is less secure than before. AI is creating huge demand for energy and metals, and the labor market may face disruption before it sees renewal. So the real issue is not whether Warsh is personally independent. The real issue is whether his policy story is economically coherent. And right now, it looks more like political storytelling than a durable macro framework. For investors, the conclusion is simple. The next decade may fall into one of three regimes. The first scenario: if Warsh is right and AI creates strong productivity growth without major energy or materials inflation, then we may return to something like the post-2008 environment. In that world, technology stocks, service companies, and consumer platforms may continue to dominate. Commodities and precious metals may struggle. This is the market's favorite scenario. But it requires a lot to go right. Energy supply must expand smoothly. Metals supply must remain adequate. Fiscal deficits must not overwhelm the bond market. And AI must raise productivity faster than it raises physical resource demand. That is possible, but it is not guaranteed. The second scenario is that AI triggers a new investment cycle in energy, grids, metals, and infrastructure. In that world, the early AI boom does not bring disinflation. It brings a resource bottleneck. Demand for electricity rises. Demand for copper rises. Demand for silver rises. Demand for uranium, natural gas, and grid equipment rises. In that world, commodities may enter a long bull market. Gold, silver, copper, oil, uranium, and related producers could become major beneficiaries. This scenario is deeply underappreciated by investors who think AI is purely a software story. The third scenario is the most uncomfortable. AI disrupts jobs. Fiscal deficits remain large. Energy and metals prices rise. Consumer demand weakens. Growth slows, but inflation does not disappear. That is stagflation. In that world, precious metals and selected commodities may perform well, while consumer and service sectors could suffer. Technology may become more divided. The strongest AI infrastructure companies may survive, but many richly valued growth stocks could struggle if rates stay elevated. This is the scenario policymakers will never admit they are creating. But markets should not ignore it. So when Kevin Warsh talks about rate cuts, QT, and AI-driven disinflation, investors should listen carefully, but not passively. The story sounds elegant, but the real economy is not elegant. The real economy has debt. It has deficits. It has bond yields. It has energy constraints. It has metal shortages. It has workers who cannot be retrained overnight. And it has politicians who want easy money without admitting the cost. So the key question for the next decade is not, will AI change the economy? Of course it will. The real question is, Will AI bring disinflation first, or will it first ignite a new inflationary cycle through energy and resource demand? My view is that the market is too comfortable with the first answer and not prepared enough for the second. And if that is right, the next decade may not belong only to software, platforms, and consumer stocks. It may also belong to energy, metals, gold, silver, copper, and the physical backbone of the AI economy. That is the debate investors should be having. Not whether Warsh sounds like Trump, but whether the entire policy narrative is built on a fantasy. Cheap money, shrinking balance sheets, booming AI, and falling inflation, all at the same time. History suggests that when politicians promise everything at once, markets eventually force them to choose. And this time, the choice may define the next 10 years.